everybody. So nice to be here. Welcome, David.
Thank you. Thanks for doing this.
I'm thrilled to be able to have this conversation. David's been someone I've looked up to my entire life. Basically, I started studying you in high school, and here we are. I'm so proud to be your friend. And I'm especially excited because the theme of this conference this year is theater in the past, present, and future. David, I can think of many reasons why you're the perfect person to discuss this topic with. In fact, I've come up with 4 ways in which you are the ideal living playwright to discuss these 3 areas of theater, and they are these. The first is your upcoming or your current project, Soft Power, which recently was performed in both Los Angeles and San Francisco, which has scenes that take place in the theater in the past, the present, and the future. The second is the fact that you recently revived and revised a project that you were greatly lauded for, and Butterfly, and you brought it into the current climate with rewrites. The third is what I've heard you refer to as a revisical, which is, do you want to just briefly describe revisical?
I didn't invent the term, but revisical, most of you know, especially if you do this, is, when you take an old musical and you rewrite the book, most of the time it's the book.
So it's taking a classic, something from the past, and bringing it into the future. And then the fourth is something that I feel like, I guess I associate it with you more than other playwrights, but that I may be wrong in that. And that is how you dig into your own personal past and write these sort of semi-autobiographical characters, dating back to you created a family history of yourself when you were a kid and later turned it into a successful play. So we're going to touch on all of those. And most importantly, I just want you to feel free to go off in whatever direction you want as you're inspired by the topics.
Yes, thank you. I will. And I mean, also past, present, future, probably because I'm kind of on the old side now. For a while, and I'm still doing it. So
great. That's 5 reasons. Let's start with talking about Soft Power. For those who haven't seen it, which I would assume being on the East Coast, many people here have not, can you give us I was going to say spoiler-free, but maybe spoiler-light synopsis?
Yeah, it's the hardest show to summarize, but I'll try because I had to figure out a way to do it when we played in LA at the Amundsen and then in San Francisco at the Current. But basically, it's a play that becomes a musical, and I wrote it with the composer Janine Tesori, who has done many fantastic works, most recently Fun Home on Broadway. And so the first about 20 minutes, well, it's 25 now, but I hope you get it in good money. The first 20 minutes is a comedy that takes place in 2016. And then the show jumps 100 years into the future. And the incident that we saw in the play part has since been mythologized and become the source material for a beloved East-West musical in China. And so the conceit for the rest of the show is that we're watching a Chinese musical written in the future about 2016, which from their point of view celebrates that China stepped in to lead the world when America collapsed after the 2016 election.
There is a historical play, a classic musical, that is both referenced in Soft Power and is also the inspiration for Soft Power. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so to some extent, the Chinese musical part of it is kind of a flip on the King and I, because it's a beloved East-West musical, but basically talks about how a Chinese national goes to America in 2016 and forms this very close bond with the American presidential candidate, Hillary Clinton. And we have tried in the musical part of it to kind of access a lot of the tools and the tropes of the classic American musical, who is, I think, like a scholar of musical theater, has been able to reference everything from Music Man to Hamilton.
Did you write this project as a critique of Whitman and I?
I mean, it started as so the show is called Soft Power, and soft power is a term that's generally an international relations term, which was coined by the Harvard professor Joseph Nye, and it refers to a nation's ability to influence other countries, not through their riches or through their military, but through the power of their ideas, through the attractiveness of their culture. And so, as Americans, we have benefited from both hard power and soft power throughout most of the 20th century, certainly since World War II. I think of Britain as an interesting example today of a country that doesn't have a lot of military, has a pretty good economy, but still has really good soft power. And China is a country that where the economy is obviously huge and important. The military is the biggest in the world, but they don't have a lot of soft power, and they really want soft power. They want to create a Broadway show that ends up on our Broadway. They want to create an international blockbuster movie. So the question for me became, okay, what are the tools that we have used to acquire soft power? And the musical is maybe one of our strongest forms. The idea that the delivery system, which is the term we use in the show, that once the violins start playing, we really kind of sit back and we just kind of absorb it, and it's so, and so whatever ideas you want to put in there often can kind of penetrate and go directly to the heart. And so we're using that delivery system to tell a different kind of story and see and experiment with how that works.
So how does that relate to your personal reaction to The King and I?
Oh, well, okay. I always loved The King and I, and when I saw the most recent revival, which was gorgeously staged, it's a wonderful production, I became sort of more aware of the degree to which, well, there's stuff in the story that's kind of suspect, like, like the premise. This white nanny basically goes to Siam and teaches the king how to kind of rule his country and bring it into the family of nations. That said, by the time I got to the end of the production, and this production as well, I'm like, I'm in tears, right? Because the king's dying, he's going to give the thing to his son learned all the lessons, it's like so moving. And so there's this kind of complicated disjunction between head and heart. And that was one of the things I wanted to explore in Soft Power.
So there are a lot of classic musicals that are being revived now that are being looked at again as problematic in various ways. To me, this is the essential question of the past and present, and hopefully the future of the theater. I think that Soft Power, and I did see the production in San Francisco.
Or one preview, we had like one preview.
And it was brilliant, and I think it serves as a commentary on that conversation, and it does call into question, I think, some of those revivals, not necessarily overtly, but implicitly.
Yeah, I mean, I think it just attempts to start to have a discussion on this subject. And it's not, I mean, the discussion is happening. It's not like my show is inspiring it, but I think that my show is trying to be part of that conversation. And, I think it's David Ives, and I was quoting him, I apologize to David, who talked about revising the books, talked about revisals for some of the encores musical. And I think it was David who said, the first thing you have to do is take out all the wife-beating jokes. So there is a point at which the culture progresses. I mean, at the moment I believe the culture is not progressing, but there is a moment at which the culture progresses, and then the sort of the it factor becomes too great. And how do we deal with moments when that happen, when in many cases, I would say in most cases, the artistry itself is still really wonderful. So how do we process both of those sort of competing impulses?
So I want to come back to the revisable idea in a little bit, but first, while we're talking about soft power, I'd love for you to explain how you brought your personal history into this script.
Okay, so I had this notion, actually I began this idea before the 2016 election, so and it obviously changed after the election, but I was writing along, and so I wrote the play part, and then I knew I had to kind of do the time jump and get to the musical. And then all of a sudden, I just found myself writing about my stabbing. So some
Does everybody know the
I
story?
can catch you up on this for those who don't know. So in 2015, around Thanksgiving, I was stabbed in the neck by a kind of random person who's never been caught, so nobody really knows what happened. But I was on my block. Around 9 p.m. I was carrying some groceries, and I just felt like I was trying to get home because I write for this TV show, and it was on that night. So thank you. And and I just felt like someone hit me on the back of the head, and I was like, what the fuck? And then I turned and I saw someone running away. And I thought, well, I'm not going to chase him, so I guess I'll just keep walking home. But then I found I couldn't walk straight, and I thought maybe I had a concussion. So I put my hand up to where I'd been hit, and then it came like covered with blood. I realized I'd been stabbed. So we live in Brooklyn, about 2 blocks away from the hospital. And I figured, okay, well, I just need to get to the hospital. I didn't think it was really going to be that serious. I just thought I needed some stitches or something. So I walked past our house, and I sort of dropped off the groceries, water, I could use some help, I think I've been attacked. But then I just kept walking because I thought, okay, the most important thing is to get to the hospital. So they caught up with me, we got to the hospital, and I fainted there. And so subsequently it turned out that my attacker had severed my vertebral artery. So I was really lucky in a lot of ways. I was lucky because I could bled out, but also because I got stabbed so high up on my neck, and I just showed Laura my scar a little earlier this morning, and it kind of just looks like I had a facelift now. But because I got stabbed so high, the likelihood would have been that a clot would have traveled up into my brain and would have gotten a stroke, and that didn't happen. So anyway, getting back to soft power, I was writing along, and I just started writing about my stabbings, and I was like, this is not going to stay in the show. This is just something I need to do. I'm processing this somehow, and that's how I do it. But then, in the overall scheme of things, the stabbing has become kind of a central, the sort of fulcrum that allows one time period to sort of travel into the other. So it's ended up being kind of a central feature of the show.
So many, is this one working? Okay, good. So many playwrights use incidents from their own lives in their plays, which is why I sort of edged at the beginning when I said, I think of you as someone who taps into your own personal history. Of course, all playwrights and probably all writers of all kinds do that. However, the key difference is that the character who gets stabbed in your play is named David Henry Hwang. The program is called DHH, and DHH has been a character in other plays of yours. This isn't the same DHH, is it?
I don't know. I don't think it's,
is this a sequel?
I don't think so. People ask me that, and I feel like it's not the same character because the DHH in Yellowface, which was the first time I used this character, was stupider than the DHH in Soft Power.
It could be a factor of time.
True. The DHH in Soft Power is a little stupid also, but in my play Yellowface, he's really kind of he is the butt of all the jokes, essentially. And so in terms of this sort of autobiographical thing, yeah, a lot of writers write autobiographical characters, and I did previous to Yellowface. And the difference, as you know, was in Yellowface naming the character after myself. And I found, I feel like autobiographical characters are really hard to write because it's hard to get any perspective on yourself. So even in, like some of the greatest plays, like Glass Menagerie, for instance, one could argue that the Tom character is less fully fleshed out than the other characters. But I found that once I named the character after myself, counterintuitively, it made it easier for me to then make him just a character. And all of a sudden, I didn't feel obliged, I didn't want to just tell the truth. Because why would you just try to tell the truth and then name the character after yourself? It seems redundant. But by naming the character after myself, I wanted to, I need to give him an arc. I need to, so, in Yellowface, the first instance, it's a character that starts out, who essentially, over the course of the play, falls into a kind of self-involvement and desire to be an Asian American role model and need to be like a social justice warrior, sort of to a ridiculous extent, and then comes to some sort of equilibrium by the end of the show. And a lot of that stuff is kind of true and kind of not, and it's the same in Soft Power.
So let's jump away from your first-person experience and talk a little bit about using your family history in your work. From what I have learned about you, you didn't really start really writing until you went to Stanford and you created your own playwriting major as a result of having got to go into San Francisco and see a bunch of plays and things. I did that. But before that, as a teenager, was it as a teenager or as a child, you went to the Philippines to do personal histories of your older relatives?
Grandmother, yeah. So that was when I was 10. And so my maternal grandmother in our family was always the person who had all the family history. And I was one of those kids who just liked to hear those stories. So when I was 10, she fell ill, and we thought she was going to pass away. And I felt, if she died, there would be a sort of double loss. On the one hand, we would lose my grandmother, but on the other hand, we would also lose all these stories. So I asked my parents if I'm born and raised in LA, and my grandparents were living in the Philippines at the time. So I asked if I could spend the summer in the Philippines with my grandparents, and they said yes. So I went over and did essentially what we would now call oral histories. I got a lot of the stories on cassette tapes, which when I got back to the States, I then kind of created, made those into a 90-page nonfiction novel about the history of my family, which then...
90 pages, you were 10?
Well, my mom helped me type.
That's just so ridiculously mature and forward-thinking that at 10 you would be concerned about your family history being, like, written down and saved. That blows my mind. I know some 10-year-olds, but they're not thinking about their grandmother's ancestry.
Yeah, I was one of these kids who liked these stories. So, and then many decades later, when I was already a playwright, it became the source material for my play Golden Child, which was on Broadway in the late 90s. But, in retrospect, I feel like, okay, some part of me, even at 10, was trying to contextualize my own existence, to understand myself as a Chinese American kid who in LA and a minority and feeling marginalized, to understand my existence separate from the images of people who look like me that I saw on television and movies. But of course I didn't know that at the time.
I remember hearing you say that you avoided pop culture references to Asians, and you didn't really know why.
Yeah, I just knew that, they sort of made me feel icky. So I knew that if I knew there was going to be an Asian character in a movie or television show, I would go out of my way not to watch it. Because really in that period, all of the people who looked like me were probably either villains or objects of ridicule. And so people sometimes ask me, do I feel like I experienced racism as a kid? And I don't remember sort of specific incidents of that, but I do feel like maybe I was oppressed by American popular culture and I spent like my entire adult life trying to redress that.
Yeah, I mean, you are often the first Asian American, Chinese American playwright to be produced on Broadway. And I wonder how that being like categorized based on your status as a minority affects you professionally and personally. Like you have all these accolades, you've gotten basically every honor in the theatrical world, and yet still you are identified by your race.
Yeah, I mean, I've gone back and forth on this over the course of my career in adult life. There have been times when I've really liked being considered an Asian American playwright and wanted to kind of put that notion forth, and there have been other times when it's felt limiting. But ultimately at this point, I think, you know, I am an Asian American, so you call me an Asian American playwright, that's true. And certainly a lot of my work, not all of my work, but most of my personal work has centered around this issue. So it's not, so there's truth to that too. I mean, what I find interesting nowadays, 2 generations late, you know, younger than me, is like young Jean Lee, and the way that young Jean, it has been branded essentially not by her ethnicity for the most part when she was downtown, but as a kind of experimentalist. Or the way Tom Bradshaw is branded not as much as an African-American playwright, but as a sort of provocateur. And when young Jean got to Broadway earlier this year, she was often referred to as the first Asian American female to be produced on Broadway. And so, you know, it's interesting at what point in the social progression of country or profession things start to shift.
I think that it's really interesting how you have taken this outsider, minority, I don't want to say trope, that sounds yeah, is there?
Nope.
Thanks. But you've made it really universal, by which I mean, I think anyone who's ever felt othered in any way can find something, can relate to your characters. But then I read an interview where you were talking about adapting Tarzan for Disney, and you said, yeah, this is a kid who, I'll let you tell it about how this is not an Asian American kid, but.
Right. But, I mean, it's about a character who's like, who's displaced, who grows up in a different culture. He thinks he's a member of that culture, and then he meets people who are from his root culture and has this identity crisis. So it's kind of an Asian American story. I mean, I think the point here is that, yes, any sort of, I mean, there's a period in my life when I said, okay, all theater is ethnic theater, which I think was an oversimplification, but it is true that I feel like being more specific, you become more universal. Because the thing that theater can do that is amazing is allow us to see both difference and underlying humanity simultaneously. So if you see a play from a different culture, you might initially notice the details that are different, the way people eat, the way people talk. But you know, if the play is well written, by a quarter of the way through, you're going, oh, that person reminds me of my Uncle Fred. So you're you're experiencing both difference and similarity at the same moment. And I think that that is an extraordinary gift that theater gives people.
So let's talk about adaptation. Tarzan was the second project that you worked with Disney on, the first being Aida. And you have also adapted stories for opera and for the theater as well. Have you done adaptations for the? I know you adapted your own your 90-page novel that you wrote.
Yeah, I did an adaptation for Seattle Children's Theater of Peter Sissa's Ben through the Red Box.
So, as an adapter versus as an original creator, what's the difference in process? And as a second part of that, working for a giant corporation like Disney, how is that different in terms of the restrictions put on you or the guidance given you by the greater power?
So I kind of divide work up into two categories. There's the work where I'm the primary artist, and everybody's supposed to support my vision, which are generally the plays. And then the work where I go in as a craftsperson to help someone else realize their vision. And they both have their own kind of joys and challenges. Sometimes it's really nice not to be the person in charge. But in that second category, I don't see a big distinction between collaborating with Disney or collaborating with Phil Glass. Because whether it's sort of high culture or pop culture, however you want to put it, the task in both cases is to try to understand what somebody else wants to create, and then bring whatever tools I have to help them achieve that. So yeah, and that applies to adaptations too. I mean, adaptations, in some sense, I feel like all my work involves some degree of adaptation, and then I tend to be one of those playwrights that references a lot of other things. For instance, in Soft Power, referencing The King and I, or in Ant Butterfly, referencing Madame Butterfly. So just about everything I do comes from some other source, and then it becomes an issue of, well, how much am I altering, subverting, questioning the source material, or to what extent am I trying to be faithful to the spirit of the source material?
You mentioned a butterfly. So I've a couple different avenues that I'm tempted to go down. We'll try to do both, take both roads. The first is I'm very curious about the adaptation or the revisal that came with the revival this past year. And I'm also curious about the adaptation for the film, where you went from being the guy who was sort of like the boss to being a craftsperson on someone else's vision. I'm going to let you choose which of those conversations to have, and then maybe we can circle back to the other.
Okay, well let's approach them chronologically. So the first one was the movie version, which David Cronenberg directed. And I think that David, so you move from theater into film, and I do agree that in most cases the director is the primary artist in a movie. If we think about the fact that movies were once called pictures, that they used to be silent, that many directors feel that if you should be able to turn down the sound and still follow the story, then it suggests that most of the information is conveyed visually, as opposed to a play where most of the information is conveyed in dialogue. So as we moved into the Ant Butterfly movie adaptation, I knew that it was going to be David's picture. And I feel like he would be comfortable with my saying, and I think he said at the time that the picture was released, that he wanted to make a movie about how all romantic love is self-delusion. And I think that's a perfectly good Cronenbergian theme. All things being equal, it's not exact. I mean, it's part of what my play was about, but it's not all of what my play is about. So I like the movie, but all things being equal, I like my play better.
That reminds me of something you said before, which is that plays aren't really meant to be read, and they only become literature after the fact, that they're meant to be performed.
Yeah. I mean, if the wonderful late Edward Albee was here, he would violently disagree with me. So just me. And I feel that plays are meant to be performed. I'm glad that they're considered literature, but the fact that we really adjust them in previews, and we may alter things to suit the actor who got cast because that person can do this thing better than that. There's all these kind of collaborative choices that we're making, which then when at some point you have to freeze the script because there's an opening night coming. And then
plays are never finished. They're
abandoned, yeah. And then that version gets printed, and that becomes literature. And I'm glad that it's literature, but it's it's a one definition of literature. So then going to the revisal last year, the revival last year.
I like revisal. It's like half
It is sort of
revision, half
I mean, I think Julie Taymor wanted to, well, she was the first one who started. I knew there was always stuff I wanted to fix in the original Young Butterfly. And once we got into it, you know, you just sort of get under the hood and then you just start sort of tinkering with a lot of stuff. And I feel like two things had changed since the show premiered 30 years ago. First of all, I was always really reluctant to do a revival at all because I felt like, you know, the thing can only be discovered once. And it's not going to have the same impact.
You mean the surprise at the end?
Yeah, I mean the sort of plot twist of the gender reveal, but also just the, you know, it was kind of audacious 30 years ago, the way that it was not, a lot of the tropes and things in the show were not as unusual as they were 30 years ago. So I sort of was reluctant for many years, and then when Nell Nugent suggested Julie as the director, I thought, okay, well that's interesting. I mean, whatever we do, it's going to be daring, we're going to take a risk, and you know, we're going to have an artistic experience. And so the things that had changed, of course, were the way that we look at gender, and the original show was more sort of gender binary, as well as the relationship between China and the West. Whereas in 1988, China was on the rise, but the West was still firmly dominant. Whereas now, of course, it's you know, at least equal, if not, and the expectations that China's going to be sort of the next great power. So we essentially wanted to adjust the show to deal with, to have more of a Chinese point of view, and also make it less gender binary. And you know, I really love Julie's production. It didn't run as long as the original at all. And we'll see now. I mean, now there's two versions of the show out. And we'll see which version, you know, we'll let the market decide, as it were. We'll see which version gets done more as we go forward. But I'm glad to have taken the risk to try to create something that would be as controversial as it was the first time.